When I say the word impeachment, I mean in some respects you almost call it the I word. It's a bad word. It's scary in a lot of respects because it's very serious. It's rarely used. Only 18 times that Congress has done it in over the 200 years since the Constitution has been around. So it's very rare. And it's often rare because it is difficult to do, whether it's on a state level or a federal level. I served in the Pennsylvania House for 18 years. Only one time in my 18 years was an impeachment process used within the legislature in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania. It hardly ever happens, and that goes for most all states, because it just consumes all of the activity. The normal occupation and the duties of government, federal or state, gets hijacked for a while, at least. It has a potential of damaging the process of government, and if it's politicized, which it may well be at this point what's happening in Washington, then it can actually weaken the relationship and the trust of the citizens, which is, frankly, for the very purpose that it was there. It was to strengthen the commitment and the trust of the citizens. So as we look at this, what did the founders want? They debated it. They carefully inserted into the U.S. Constitution this tool called impeachment. I'm going to say that they put it in there to help maintain checks and balances and to ensure a separation of power. We're going to talk about that now a little bit as one of the whys. But, David, let me go to you. You've studied the Constitution. You deal with that as an attorney. From a most fundamental perspective, in your opinion, how does the impeachment provision actually help to ensure the very carefully crafted concept we have in our constitutional republic called checks and balances?
In our system of government, we elect our leaders, and we expect the election process to be the fundamental process by which our leaders are selected. Impeachment was not intended to be a campaign strategy.
That's a key word you're saying there. That's a key word. Okay, go ahead. I'm interested in what you're talking about on here.
Yes, it was never intended to be a campaign strategy. Now, I will say this. They're not. These Democrats in the House are using this, I'm sad to say, as a 2020 campaign strategy, and it can really hurt them bad. And the only reason why I think it's going forward now is that Pelosi is looking at the tea leaves. She's looking at these Democratic candidates, and she sees there's trouble. She knows there's trouble. If she had a very strong Democrat candidate, somebody ready to pick up the ball and run with it and knock out the President Trump, she wouldn't do it. She wouldn't interfere. She would leave it to the election process. But she sees her candidates are weak. When I look at these guys, and I see them all up there, all 10 or 12 of them on the campaign stage getting ready to debate, I'm thinking of those patients in the movie One Flew Over the Cuckoo's Nest. I mean, these people look really bad.
Well, David, let me come back in and follow up on what you're saying, because I think you make a really good point, what you're saying. But, on the other hand, by doing what she has done, and if the process officially starts, we're going to talk about, there have to be some articles of impeachment written, and I don't think they're there. We'll hold that for the next segment's discussion. But when it actually officially begins, it will grind through the process. It puts into motion some gears that crank away and will go forward, but it will consume time. And I suggested the other day in a program, I think one of the things, though, that it will happen, and maybe it is because there is no strong candidate, and I don't dispute what you're saying at all there, but on the other hand, by so doing, it's going to make every one of those Democrat candidates, they're all going to have to get on board and make this an issue and come out in public support of the impeachment process, lest they lose the support of the really radical left within the party. Don't you agree?
What she is doing, when she's setting this up, she is interfering with the ability of her candidates to fine-tune their message, to come up with a reason why you should vote Democrat in 2020.
Well, that's part of the problem.
If this thing goes on and on month after month, these Democrats will have to change their story relative to what's going on in Washington instead of what is going on in the campaign trail. She has really hurt herself big time.
All right, now let's go back to this because I want to stay on the why part of it, checks and balances. What you are describing, I think most thinking people would look and say, this is an abuse of the process. We're already talking about it. When it's threatened as a tool before the president was even seated as a president, you know that it is an ongoing strategy, and it's not related to a particular offense because he hadn't committed anything yet. He wasn't even in office. So that being the case, we got a real problem there, and we're talking about here the abuse of it. But let's go on the proper side of it. When the founders put it in, under a proper usage of impeachment, how was that intended to keep the accountability side? What was the positive side of the impeachment provision if it's properly used?
The word impeach simply means to bring charges. Think of the word impeach to mean indictment. When a person is accused of a crime, they are indicted for the crime, and then they have to go into court and they experience a trial before a judge and a jury. What the word impeachment here means is the House will come up with the charges, the accusations, the reason for an indictment, and then it goes to the Senate. And the Senate conducts the trial. If it's the President of the United States that's being impeached, then the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court is the judge in the Senate, and then they conduct the trial. So the word impeachment means to accuse or to bring charges. That's all it is. It's an old, middle-aged word for something that's very simple to understand.
But, David, the effect of it properly done is that someone in the executive branch who is in the enforcement side who may get carried away and abuse their power and look more like a tyrant than a servant of the people, or a judge, a Supreme Court justice who may be elected and there for life and do things, which is why 13 of the 18 cases so far were brought against judges. They're not up for election. It was there to put some kind of a fear into the hearts of those who had a position that they would be easily tempted to exploit, perhaps. And so it was a fear factor because they could be removed from office before a next election, or in the case of a judge, they're not even going to face an election. So is that, in your perspective before the law, is that the strongest message or fear factor of an impeachment that leads to accountability, or is there something else?
The main purpose of the impeachment is to remove somebody who's not obeying the law. The key provision in the United States Constitution for impeachment is Article 2, Section 4, which basically says the President, Vice President, and all civil officers of the United States shall be removed from office on impeachment. That's the House. And conviction. That's the Senate. Of treason, bribery, and other high crimes and misdemeanors. Now that's it. There's no real guidelines on exactly how the House and the Senate go about doing it. The Constitution doesn't have that. All it says, there's only two other areas where the Constitution talks about it, and that's in Article 1. Article 1 says only the House can do impeachments. Article 1 says only the Senate can conduct the trials, and if it's the President, it's the Chief Justice. Article 1 says you cannot use the impeachment process to convict somebody of a crime. You can only use the impeachment process for the sole purpose of removing them from office. After that, then you can charge them with crime.
All righty, David. I want to come back and talk a little bit about that in the next segment with you with process. I read when I was in the House that one person said the impeachment process is a healthy one. It ought to be used often. That's what one of our founders said. but used properly, because it puts manners on and provides accountability for those in positions that otherwise may be tempted to abuse it.